Ethan Reynolds wiped the sweat from his brow as he hammered the final nail into the wooden fence post. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light over the 15 acres of land his grandfather had left him. It was a sanctuary, the place he had spent summers as a kid, fishing in the small creek, climbing the oak trees, and listening to the wind whisper through the grass. But now, it wasn't just his sanctuary. It was his future. After leaving his high-paying but soul-sucking architecture job, Ethan had returned to Pine Brook Hills, determined to make something meaningful out of the land. He had a vision, something sustainable, something different from the cookie-cutter subdivisions popping up everywhere. He had no idea that someone else had a different plan for his land. A sharp honk pulled him from his thoughts. A white HOA-branded SUV rolled up his gravel driveway, kicking up dust. The door swung open, and Victoria Langley, the head of the Pine Brook Hills Homeowners Association, stepped out. She was dressed like she had just walked out of a corporate boardroom. Pressed navy suit, clipboard in hand, a permanent scowl etched into her face. Ethan sighed. He already knew this wasn't a social call. "Mr. Reynolds," Victoria said smoothly, her tone dripping with fake politeness. "I assume you received our letter?" "Letter?" Ethan frowned. Victoria handed him a thick envelope with the HOA's Golden Boss logo. "It's all in here. I suggest you take a careful look." Ethan ripped the envelope open. His eyes darted over the words, his stomach dropping as he read. Notice of Community Development Expansion. Dear Mr. Reynolds, as per Pine Brook Hills HOA policy, your property now falls under the jurisdiction of the Homeowners Association due to an inclusion in the revised Community Expansion Plan. As such, all land use must be in accordance with HOA guidelines. Failure to comply will result in fines and legal action. Sincerely, Victoria Langley, Pine Brook Hills HOA President. Ethan's jaw tightened. This has to be a mistake. My land has never been part of the HOA. Victoria clasped her hands together. It wasn't, until now. He clenched the letter in his fist. You can't just claim my land. "Oh, but we can," she said with a smirk. "Our expansion plan was approved by the city council last month, and since your land wasn't actively developed, it fell under the annexation clause in the revised community charter. Legally, it belongs to us now." Ethan stared at her, heart pounding. "This is my land, my grandfather's land. You can't just take it." Victoria tilted her head. "You're welcome to file a complaint, but I'd advise against it. Fighting the HOA can be expensive." She turned on her heel, walking back to her SUV. "Oh, and Ethan?" She glanced over her shoulder. "That fence you just built? It's not HOA approved. If it's not removed by next week, you'll be fined." The engine roared to life, and Victoria drove off, leaving Ethan standing in a cloud of dust, gripping the letter so tightly his knuckles turned white. They had just declared war, and they had no idea who they were messing with. The next morning, Ethan sat at his kitchen table, stacks of old property records spread in front of him. He had called Rachel Carter, a no-nonsense property attorney and an old friend from college. "This is insane," Rachel muttered as she flipped through the documents. "HOAs can be bad, but this is next-level corruption." Ethan exhaled sharply. "How can they claim my land like this?" Rachel pulled out a highlighted document. There's a clause in their revised HOA bylaws, hidden in the fine print. It says any undeveloped property within a specific radius of HOA-governed land can be annexed if it's not in active use. The city council approved this without notifying independent landowners. Ethan's fingers curled into a fist. So they tricked the city into giving them my land? Rachel nodded grimly. And they probably have developers lined up ready to build expensive townhomes. If you don't fight this, they'll bulldoze everything and slap HOA fees on you for the rest of your life. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. His grandfather had spent decades preserving this land. And now, a greedy HOA wanted to pave over for profit? Not on his watch. What are my options? He asked. Rachel smirked. We take them to court. And while we fight them legally, you need to prove the land is actively in use. A slow grin spread across Ethan's face. I think I have an idea. That night, Ethan paced his porch, staring out at the wide-open land. The HOA wanted to steal his property for high-end developments, but what if he developed it first? His mind raced with ideas. The city wouldn't support massive townhome expansions, but they might support affordable housing solutions. Then it hit him. A tiny home village. Not just any tiny home village. An eco-friendly, sustainable community that provided affordable housing to people priced out of traditional neighborhoods. It was the perfect counterattack. It legally counted as land development, blocking the HOA from claiming it. It would gain public support, making it harder for the HOA to fight him. It would expose their corruption, showing the world their greed. Ethan grabbed his phone and started making calls. He had connections in the architecture world, sustainable housing experts, and media contacts who would love the story. By morning, the battle lines were drawn. Ethan wasn't just going to fight the HOA. He was going to bury them under the weight of their own greed. Ethan barely slept. By dawn, he was on the phone with an old college friend, Marcus Patel, an expert in sustainable housing development. "I need help," Ethan said, pacing his porch. "The HOA is trying to steal my land. I need to develop it fast before they take it." Marcus let out a low whistle. "Damn, man, that's dirty. What's your plan?" "Tiny homes," Ethan said, his mind racing. Not just a couple of them. A whole tiny home village. Eco-friendly, affordable, sustainable. Something the city would approve in a heartbeat. Marcus was silent for a beat, then laughed. "Dude, that's genius. HOA's worst nightmare. I need designs, permits, connections, fast." "You're in luck," Marcus said. "I'm working on a similar project in Oregon. I can hook you up with prefab homes, investors, and legal consultants." Ethan's chest swelled with determination. "Let's do it." Within hours, Marcus sent him 3 modern tiny home designs, efficient, stylish, and ready for immediate construction. Ethan wasted no time submitting the initial permit request to the city. The first punch had been thrown. Ethan knew it wouldn't take long for the HOA to retaliate. That afternoon, Victoria Langley showed up again, flanked by 2 HOA board members and a lawyer in a stiff gray suit. "You're making a mistake, Ethan," Victoria said, smiling like a viper. "The HOA doesn't allow alternative housing. Tiny homes are not compliant with community standards." Ethan folded his arms. "That's funny, because my land isn't in your community." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Actually, according to the newly revised bylaws." "No," Ethan cut in. "According to state property law, you can't enforce HOA rules on private landowners who refuse membership." Victoria's smile faltered. "Oh, and by the way," Ethan continued, pulling out his phone, "I sent my development plans to the city this morning. They love the idea." Victoria's eye twitched. She was losing control. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "We'll find a way to stop you." "We'll see about that," Ethan shot back. As the HOA team stormed off, Ethan knew the real war had just begun. 2 days later, Ethan stood at the edge of his land, watching as the first delivery trucks arrived. Prefab tiny homes, solar panels, sustainable materials. The first 6 tiny homes would be built within weeks, and investors were already lining up to back the project. But as the workers started unloading supplies, a police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers stepped out. "Mr. Reynolds," one of them asked, "we've received a report that you're violating zoning regulations." Ethan clenched his jaw. He knew exactly who had made the call. "Everything is legal," Ethan said, handing over his permits. "This is a private land development, fully within city code." The officers scanned the documents. After a moment, one of them sighed. "Looks like you're good to go," he said. "Sorry for the trouble." As they left, Ethan spotted Victoria watching from across the street, her expression dark and furious. She had just lost another round. Ethan knew the HOA wasn't finished. Over the next week, they tried everything to stop him. The city inspector showed up, citing anonymous complaints. His internet was mysteriously disconnected. Fake fines appeared in his mailbox. The final straw came when his water supply was cut off. "This is war," Ethan muttered, dialing Rachel. "This is illegal," Rachel said. "We're filing harassment charges against the HOA." And then Ethan had an idea. If the HOA wanted to play dirty, he was going to make sure the whole world saw it. Ethan set up hidden cameras around his property. 2 nights later, he caught an HOA board member sneaking onto his land, spray painting violation across his tiny home walls. Ethan uploaded the footage online. Within hours, it went viral. Police Scarlight, corrupt HOA caught vandalizing private property. Police Scarlight. News stations picked up the story. HOA residents started speaking out. Victoria Langley? She was silent. But Ethan knew she was planning her next move. Ethan was making progress, but Victoria had one last nuclear option: a lawsuit. The HOA filed an emergency motion to seize Ethan's land under the Community Preservation Act, claiming his tiny homes were an eyesore and lowered property values. If they won, the land would be forcibly annexed. Ethan had 2 weeks to stop it. The courtroom was packed. On one side, Ethan and Rachel, backed by a team of homeowners' rights activists. On the other, Victoria and the HOA, armed with high-powered attorneys. For hours, the HOA argued that Ethan's tiny homes were an unauthorized development. Then Rachel stood up. "Your Honor," she said, "we have proof that the HOA has been illegally harassing my client, violating property laws, and falsifying community guidelines." She played Ethan's hidden camera footage. The judge's face darkened. "Mrs. Langley," the judge said, turning to Victoria, "is this true?" Victoria stammered. "This is taken out of context." "Enough." The judge slammed his gavel. "I hereby reject the HOA's motion and rule in favor of Mr. Reynolds." Ethan had won. The HOA had officially lost control. With the HOA's grip shattered, Ethan's tiny home village became a national movement. Small Blue Diamond low-cost housing. Small Blue Diamond sustainable living. Small Blue Diamond HOA-free communities. Other homeowners started fighting back against corrupt HOAs. Victoria Langley? She resigned in disgrace. Pinebrook Hills was no longer ruled by fear. Ethan had done more than protect his land. He had changed the game. Ethan stood in the middle of his thriving tiny home village, watching his families move into their brand-new eco-friendly homes. What had started as a battle for his land had turned into something much bigger. The first 15 tiny homes were already occupied. The local government endorsed his project as a model for sustainable housing. Real estate investors were lining up to fund the expansion. But the best part? Other homeowners were following his lead. Social media had exploded with people sharing their own HOA horror stories, and Ethan was getting hundreds of messages from people asking how to fight back against corrupt HOA boards. It was time to take things to the next level. Ethan called Marcus. "We're going national." Ethan said, "It's time to build HOA-free communities all across the country." Marcus laughed. "Man, you really don't do things small, do you?" "Nope." Ethan grinned. "And neither does the movement we just started." Just when Ethan thought it was over, the HOA made one final move. Victoria Langley was gone, but the remaining HOA board members weren't giving up. One morning, Ethan received a certified letter. Cease and desist notice. "Dear Mr. Reynolds, your tiny home village is causing environmental concerns and is an unauthorized community development. Failure to vacate the premises will result in legal action. Sincerely, Pinebrook Hills HOA." Ethan rolled his eyes. They never learned. He picked up the phone and called his lawyer, Rachel. "The HOA is trying to shut us down again," Ethan said. Rachel laughed. "They're really desperate. The court's already ruled in your favor. This is nothing but a scare tactic." Ethan smirked. "Let's make sure it backfires." Instead of ignoring the HOA's baseless threats, Ethan went public. He contacted the biggest news outlets and told them about the continued harassment. Police Scarlight, corrupt HOAs still trying to steal land, even after losing in court. Police Scarlight. The story went viral. Again. By the end of the week, the city council announced an official investigation into the Pinebrook Hills HOA. The HOA was officially on life support. Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before it collapsed completely. A few months later, Ethan got a call from Rachel. "You're going to want to see this," she said, barely containing her excitement. He drove down to the city courthouse, where a massive crowd had gathered. The city had completed its investigation. The HOA had been caught. Heavy checkmark falsifying property claims. Heavy checkmark illegally finding homeowners. Heavy checkmark misusing HOA funds for personal gain. The punishment? The HOA was officially disbanded. No more HOA fees. No more corrupt board members. No more control. Pinebrook Hills was finally free. Ethan had won completely. With the HOA gone for good, Ethan went all in on his dream. Small Blue Diamond, his tiny home village, expanded to 50 homes. Small Blue Diamond, the town council, officially approved it as a permanent development. Small Blue Diamond other landowners reached out, asking for help to build their own HOA-free communities. Within a year, Ethan's land wasn't just a tiny home village anymore. It was the first fully HOA-free town in the state. And people loved it. No ridiculous rules. No power-hungry HOA presidents. Just affordable, sustainable living. It was exactly what people had been waiting for. Ethan had started something far bigger than he ever imagined. People all over the country were dismantling their HOAs, building their own communities, and taking back control. Loudspeaker, how to escape your HOA. Ethan Reynolds shares his plan. Loudspeaker, the death of HOAs. New communities rising up. Loudspeaker, HOA-free living. A new era of homeownership. Ethan became the face of the movement. And when an investor offered him the chance to expand nationwide, he didn't hesitate. This wasn't just about his land anymore. This was about changing the way people lived. Forever. Years later, Ethan stood at the edge of his now thriving town, watching as people walked through the streets, living freely, without some power-hungry HOA breathing down their necks. His fight had started with one corrupt HOA trying to steal his land, but it had ended with an entire movement. The war was over, and Ethan had won.